Morning all. I have another very interesting game of Mikhail Tal to show you from that amazing tournament played in Bled-Zagreb, the candidates tournament of 1959. So each of the contestants had to play each other 4 times. A grueling event indeed. So the old candidate system. And okay, this is in round 16 against, I'm going to get the pronunciation from chessgames.com.
Svetozar Gligoric.
Svetozar Gligoric.
Svetozar Gligoric.
This is a fantastic player. I am in 1950, GM in 1951. Generally considered, according to chessgames.com, as the greatest Yugoslav and Serbian player ever. He was born in 1923 in Belgrade, in what was then the Kingdom of Yugoslavia. And he passed away in his home city 89 years later. So he completed a life which was widely regarded as a key figure in the development of chess in his native country. So many achievements. I mean, he's influenced some of my pet openings like the King's Engine. So many great ideas. For example, in the King's Engine defense. Really fantastic player. Check out his bio at WhiteElo of chessgames.com. So Mikhail Tal, playing white in this game, plays d4, showing great versatility. He can not just play e4, he can play d4 as well. Knight f6, we have c4, e6, we go into a Queen's Engine defense with b6, knight c3, bishop b7. Black's strategy is very similar to Nimzo really, still e4 pressure, and in fact we have a delayed bishop b4 now. Bishop b4 putting more pressure on e4. Black's trying to control that key square in this opening. e3. We have now h6. Bishop drops back. g5. So quite a few forcing moves from black here. Knight e4. So threatening, of course, the take here. That's protected. Black incurs the doubled pawns, but giving up the bishop pair. So a classic trade-off in chess. Structure versus giving up the bishop pair. d6. We have now bishop d3. This is all pretty standard stuff actually. Knight takes g3. But here, in Livebook, apparently f5 is more popular in this position. For example, games go like this. d5. This is quite common line. Where black's trying to close up things. And white's lost the bishop pair. This is thought to be about equal, this kind of continuation. White still has got heavily fragmented pawns here. So it's thought to be about equal. So in this game we didn't see f5, we see actually knight takes g3. And there's 2 ways of taking. Actually f takes is overall a little bit more popular, believe it or not. But hg was chosen in this game. On fg, for example, like this, white's got that potential f-file pressure dynamics. But okay, h takes, and we've always got to look out for knight takes g5 when the queen's not protecting now because of this h-file. Knight d7, a4. It'll be nice to dissolve this isolated pawn and also maybe have the options of ab and a6. Black stops both ideas, just plays a5 here. Rook b1, and it looks as though c5 might be a pain in the future. At the moment, it's held with the knight. This is a curious position. It's actually it's actually limited options for black here, it seems. Black played another forcing move, g4, but what exactly can black do if he doesn't play g4? It seems quite committal. The knight's ready to go to h4 to protect g2, so it's not about winning the pawn. If we move like knight f6, then we've got the h-file dynamic, knight takes g5. And say queen e7, then actually bishop e4 might be quite good here to get off the light square bishops. Black doesn't want to do a move like this. This is quite good. If castling, we can take here and then c5 is dangerous. So g4, yeah, it doesn't seem to be that many great choices for black. At the moment, g4 was played. Okay, so knight h4. Knight f6 is played here. We have d5, and this is often quite thematic. White's trying to gain access to f5, especially for a knight. So black actually ignored this, queen e7. If he plays e takes d5, here's an example, c takes, which undoubles the pawns for the moment. So if white gets to play c4 here, that'd be wonderful. So the diagonal is quite useful. So if black takes, this kind of position is very advantageous to white in general. Also, the rook can swing using that b file. This is very dangerous for black's king safety. There's moves like queen d2 now for queen g5, threatening mate on g7 after. This can be ending up to be completely crushing for black's position. So it's too dangerous to do this stuff. So d5, yeah, giving up the f5 square is always going to be dangerous. We have queen e7, and white just castles on the king side here. Knight f d7, d takes e6 is played now. Of course, black doesn't want a full con g6. He has to take with the queen. Stuff like this is not, for example, pleasant. So queen takes, bishop f5 is played. White doesn't mind about getting rid of his own double pawns here, potentially. He's got huge pressure in this position now of the rook fd1. He's opened up things. This pawn's loose. It's a difficult position for black. Knight f6. We have rook d4. Queen c6. Remember, it's not threatening makes the knight on h4. And now here we have a very nice tactical idea. Can you guess what Mikhail Tal played? If I give you 5 seconds. Okay, instead of, you might consider just taking the pawn, but actually we have a more interesting move, bishop e6. Very, very interesting. Black plays in this position. It looks quite dangerous here to take. He plays actually rook g8. If he took, then check, and actually white can win the rook and then take the pawn here. Very good for white. So this is kind of ignored with rook g8. Also guarding that g6 square a bit more, just in case of some sack, guarding things. Bishop c4 threatens bishop b5, pinning the queen. Now probably, technically, it seems as though black should simply castle queenside here. I'm not entirely sure white can prove a definite advantage. It looks, from an engine perspective, this line looks equalish. Although it looks scary from a human perspective. For example, white can actually force virtually this position where he gets, in this line, he gets that light square bishop, but this is not the end of the story. Black might actually be able to hold this type of position because it's difficult for white. Is kind of tied to the center, and there's going to be resources like rook e5 to lock down the e pawn. It's actually not entirely easy to checkmate black here, although it looks really dangerous. So this might have been the way to play things, to simply castle queenside. It seems that might be the best move here. So this may be the first kind of mistake, relative mistake. We have here bishop b5, queen c5. The thing is, white is basically forcing, now he's getting his rook to a dangerous place and winning a pawn at the same time. Rook takes c7. Bishop e4 gains a big tempo. Bishop d3, but with that c7 pawn gone, b6 is now vulnerable. So we have d5, which not only protects the bishop but hits the rook. Rook c6, so more pressure on the pawn. Rook b8. White could simply have just taken this pawn, but actually plays another interesting move, which may be stronger. Keeping all the pressure here going, Tal plays c4. Very interesting. So with ideas of like c5 to use the pin, potentially. The queen is trying to protect f6 as well as b8, so it's a bit overworked potentially. We have rook g5. On d takes c4, this position, rook takes c4 here, is dangerous for black. White's much better. Knight takes h6 here. White's much better there. So yeah, black's got to be really careful. It's a bit shaky, his position. He plays rook g5. c5, so using that pin. So remember, if taking now, we've also got f6 to think about. d4 now. That's taken. Bishop takes e4. Queen takes e4. C takes b6, elegantly protecting the queen. And it looks like a dangerous pawn. Black takes off and tries to get that pawn, but it's at a big cost here. I mean, a really big cost. b7, and it looks as though knight c5, black's going to get that pawn, right? Because he's also stopped immediate things like rook c8. But after rook b5, this is a really nasty pin now. After knight takes b7, I mean, really nasty. We're equal on pawns, but qualitatively, white's position is a lot better. This is a really nasty pin. So rook takes b5, rook takes. Black has to scramble over here with his king. If he plays something like h6, it'll already be too late because of knight f5 with the idea of knight d6. Yeah, it's just too late there. You know, here, then we've got rook takes winning because of that fork. So black immediately makes way to try and protect the rook and stuff like that. We have knight f5 check, which picks up a pawn. So the scene is being set here basically, because white, in taking these pawns, is basically saying these pawns are going to be the pass pawns, and black has got a potential pass pawn here in the form of the a pawn, and we see this play out, this scenario. So opposite side pass pawns coming up because black is taking out the a4 pawn potentially now. Knight c5, taking out the a4 pawn slowly but surely. So we've got a bit of a race situation now. Remember, these pawns are doubled, so you might not think it's entirely clear cut, and you'd be right. g4, knight c3, some accuracy is required here. If white is in a rush just to push this pawn, I mean, this is quite a major asset, an outside pass pawn. So Tal very carefully does this with the move king g3. He has to get the king to come in the game, to be making sure that this king is not sort of blocking these pawns. I'll give you a scenario where if you don't use the king, this scenario I'm going to show you now, if the king wasn't used, the knight's kind of tied down to this pass pawn, and here if the black king gets like this, it's, say, mopping up that one, it's going to be a draw basically. It's going to be very close to, it's going to be difficult for white to do anything. It's going to be a draw basically, because the knight could sack itself for the two pawns here. So the white king has to get involved, and it does. Tal's actually a very strong endgame player as well, and he's very aggressive with his king in the endgame, and you need to be very polished in all phases of the game. King g3, try and stop the black king coming over and doing something like that horrible. a4. Instead, we get a really tense race now, where this knight is holding up things for that pawn, and in fact, it becomes very dramatic with this knight now, because here the knight plays knight a1 just to gain some time here. Knight a1. It's perhaps an instructive knight and pawn ending now. Black's going to need 2 moves to zap the knight and also get out of the way. It's quite a lot of hassle to get this pawn to queen, basically. In the meantime, White's pawns are menacing now. The knight's not holding up both those pawns. So we end up, although Black's queening first, it's impossible to take this pawn here because of queen g6 check. That's one slight snag here. You know, if Black takes the pawn, queen g6 check, and then we're winning with this pawn. So it's actually hopeless now after queen a5 check, king h6. There's no hope for Black in this position. Oh, the queen will be on its way. A fascinating game in the Queen's Indian, showing Tal is playing all sorts of positions in 1959. It's a kind of more strategic, not just e4 hack attacks. The d5 is a kind of thematic break against the Nimza Indian there. In this particular position, even though White didn't have the dark square bishop, it was about the f5 square. Perhaps technically Black should have castled queenside, although the variations looked a bit scary. Instead of that, king f8 was played. White ended up having a very advantageous endgame, starting with that nasty pin, which had to be resolved by Black as an urgent matter. So a fascinating game, very interesting. Hope you enjoyed it. Comments, questions, likes appreciated. Thanks very much.